How do you feel? I mean, we know your opinion on Bohemian Rhapsody, and you showed
Mm.
some concern that with Robbie Williams' involvement in Better Man, that maybe too many corners will be rounded. But it sounds like you feel this product is of much better than Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, I think he. Oh, yes, without a doubt, without a doubt.
Mhm.
It for a start, it doesn't have. I think because of the monkey thing, it doesn't have that same
It's
kind
what
of.
Gabriel said. It has a monkey singing, man.
So it
You're
has that.
wonderful to
It,
see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.
James, I've been walking around the MTR and seeing this poster advertisement with a monkey on the cover of Rolling Stone, and it's called Better Man. I'm thinking, what is this film? And it was actually my daughter's boyfriend. They were over a week or so ago and said,
that's
"Oh
your
yeah,
daughter's
that's
boyfriend. Oh, how
no, yeah,
unfortunate.
yeah, that's it. No, when I mentioned it, he goes, "Oh no, I'm a Robbie Williams fan." He said, "Oh, that's the biopic about Robbie Williams." I said, "They did a biopic of Robbie Williams?" He goes, "Oh yeah, it's good." So I thought, I'd like to check this out. And because I wouldn't say I'm a huge Robbie Williams fan, but I enjoy him.
Mm.
I've appreciated his career. There's a number of songs he sings that I really like. And, I've watched a couple of his concert videos. I've never seen him live. Gabriel was homesick the other day. And so we just sat together and we watched it. And maybe it's because my expectations were low. I didn't, it's a biopic, I'm planning on it hitting certain notes and
Mm.
the entry level of the young kid rising to fame fast, too much sex, too much drugs, too much nightlife, falling, finding redemption, and ending with some kind of reestablishment. We can all go home with a big smile on our face. I'm thinking that's the typical, beats in a biopic. And I'm thinking, where does the monkey come in? An anthropomorphic CGI chimpanzee is playing Robbie Williams. I'm like,
Others see me.
For the next 2 hours, your ass is mine!
To be honest, I've always been a little less evolved. I don't wanna rock, so let's take it from the top.
what?
Yeah.
I thought this is not going to work. And I got to admit, it took me about 20 minutes in the film. It was kind of annoying me for a while. And then I don't know if something just switched in my brain, but then it all made sense.
Okay, interesting. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of things to say about Better Man. I mean, Robbie Williams was a huge part or huge public figure in my life growing up. Just because I'm the right age, take that burst onto the
Yeah.
scene. What in the late
Yeah, you are in the
80s?
sweet spot. You're
I,
10
I
years
mean,
younger than me.
I mean, exactly right. Take that with the biggest thing when I was, a young lad and becoming a teenager, and then he's the bad boy that split. He was the youngest member of the band. He split off, and then he went through he became sort of torn apart by the tabloid press, which, as we all know, in England is particularly
Was there a
unforgiving.
team Barlow and a team Williams? I mean, how did that
Well,
go?
yeah, Team Barlow was essentially take that. It was Team Take That, and he got sort of kicked out or he left or whatever, depending on who you speak to, and then he really spiraled and he had sort of weight problems and health problems and drug problems and booze problems and women problems and all of these things, and it was all very much on the front page of the Sun and the Mirror and the Star, all the red top newspapers every day. You couldn't get away from it, and nor could he, more importantly. But then he managed to turn it all around, and he became, as a solo artist, like the biggest thing in the country. And like by the time I was at university, so in the mid 90s, he was the biggest artist around, and you couldn't escape his music. There was like Blur and Oasis, and Robbie Williams was there, and all of that music was just playing non-stop. And I had a part-time job while I was at university at Virgin Megastore. So I was being exposed even more so to all of that kind of very mainstream popular music day in, day out. And he was absolutely at the forefront of all of that. And so, if nothing else, watching this is a huge nostalgia trip for me, just because hearing those songs again or seeing that period, seeing those stories and those events and being like, oh yeah, I remember when that happened and when that happened and that concert and those outfits. And the film is really good at getting all of those details right, like particularly kind of like the clothes that the
Right.
Take That band were wearing
Mhm.
for different iconic performances and gigs, and the way they kept changing their haircuts, so they never looked the same. That was part of
Yeah.
the branding, was that
I
they
didn't
all.
understand. I didn't realize they started out marketing to gay clubs. That I was at the
Right.
beginning going, that's something that totally took me by surprise.
I think I was only half consciously aware of that. I think when that was happening, I was a little bit young to really figure it out because I don't think it was overtly pointed out to the general public that way.
Right.
But then you look back and you look at the outfits and how they were being photographed, and you're like, oh god, yeah, of course. It all makes sense now, and I really like how the film handles that. So yeah, I mean, the idea of a Robbie Williams biopic, you're kind of like, okay, and then you hear that Robbie Williams is going to be very much involved, and you're kind of like, okay, that can always go one of two ways. It can always mean that all the rough edges are shorn away, but I gave him the benefit of the doubt going in because he's always been very good at being, in recent years, definitely, at being very open publicly and talking about his issues and his problems and his struggles and all the rest of it. So I was kind of like, okay, I think he's going to be using this as a cathartic, sort of therapeutic experience as much as anything else. And then you get to the chimpanzee bit and you're like, what? Why? Yeah. And, and they justify it. They're like, he always felt slightly less evolved growing up. And he always felt like he was always sort of labeled as a bit of a cheeky monkey and this kind of thing. So you're like, okay, but why is anybody going to finance this, let alone buy a ticket to see it? It just seems it's a very specific, very intrusive choice that has no relevance to the subject matter.
It sounds like the idea was born in the brain of Michael Gracie, who was the writer-director of The Greatest Showman. Writer-director, I believe.
Definitely director.
And I saw an interview with him and Robbie Williams on YouTube where Robbie Williams said it was Gracie that approached him with that idea. And at first he felt the same way that you just felt. But then it was like, oh, yeah, this would actually make sense because it kind of mixes that familiar biopic trope that we know so well kind of up a little bit. Like I said, we kind of I remember the VH1 days. Do you remember the VH1 Behind the Music days? Does that ring a bell? Or is that an American thing?
It's an American thing, but we get
it's American thing, but it became, it was super popular for a while, but then it became kind of same because it was the same story. The band, it's a bunch of young people who suddenly become famous all of a sudden. There's too much drugs, too much women, too much everything. And they fall, they split. And then, of course, they have a reunion after they've matured and gone through rehabilitation. They have that reunion concert and we can all celebrate it. And we've kind of made that in biopics, too. We kind of know how the traditional biopic is going to go. So for me, Gabriel kept saying, but Dad, it has, it's a biopic movie, but it has him as a monkey. And it's like he kept making this point of, but look at the monkey's dancing. But look, the monkey's singing. And as he would kind of reinforce this in me, I'm going, It does kind of flip the tables a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is coming off sort of a wave of pop biopics. I mean, there've always been a lot of them, but I think probably because of the success of Bohemian Rhapsody, they've like scrambled to be like, okay, what
your
other
favorite
British
movie,
artists?
by the way? Your
I love it so
movie.
much. I love it so much.
Where the band didn't have any influence and round those sharp edges a little bit.
Yeah, but I think sort of
listeners, I got to poke the bear occasionally. This is one of this is one of James's open wounds.
I hate Bohemian Rhapsody so much, but I think a film that's closer to this is Rocket Man, the Elton John movie. Where it's using the music as a jumping off point rather than necessarily the biography, the life story, and then it chooses to recontextualize songs to have meaning about specific elements of moments in his life, that kind of thing. But yes, you've got this ape, this chimpanzee at the center of it all. And what surprised me more than anything is that I think even faster than you did, I completely forgot that it was a chimpanzee that we were looking at. I think within about the first 5 minutes, you're kind of like, okay, all right, he's an ape. Okay, fine. And then you just go with it. And it's not
your brain
like,
just kind of, your brain makes that switch.
And I think the film, it helps that he's not an ape to other characters. So it's not like other people are going, it's a monkey, it's a singing or anything like that. It's just how he sees himself. or how he feels. So an internal sensibility that has been externalized for the viewer. And so I think that makes it easier to get past, and it just really works. The CGI is really good. It's not surprising. I think it's got an Oscar nomination, hasn't it, for its
Yeah,
for its visual
it is
effects.
really done really well because there's so much singing and dancing in it. There's a
Mm.
lot of his movements, because Robbie Williams is an extremely talented man. Watch any concert video and you realize this is not just a pretty face who got a fluke. This is an extremely talented individual. And so they were able to capture those movements with that CGI chimpanzee.
Yeah, and he provides his own narration, his own voiceover. I think it is a different actor, isn't it? Doing the motion capture,
Yes.
playing him,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
gets all of his mannerisms down fine. But because he's doing, he does the narration and the vocals, but the actor does the voice, the spoken voice.
Right.
But the combination seems to work, and because you've constantly got Robbie Williams' own voice in your head, talking you through all of this, and then you have all of the in my case certainly you have all these first-hand memories of a number of these incidents, or not exactly first-hand, but I remember them when they happened. I wasn't there, but I remember them when they happened. That it just helps sell you on it. And I came away incredibly surprised by just how much I enjoyed it, how much I liked it, how good so much of the other casting is, particularly the other members of Take That, are just spot on. They don't look exactly like it, but they get the mannerisms and the personality and the overall vibe of those characters so well that you just really go with it. And it was very much, for me, it was very much like another thing I saw fairly recently was the 3-part David Beckham documentary on Netflix, which is the exact same period of time as this. It goes on later, but the whole and so it was very reminiscent in much the same way, where it was like, oh my god, all of these incidents and the soundtrack to all of that on that documentary was a lot of Blur and Oasis. I'm sure there was some Robbie Williams in there as well, and it was just it was my formative years. It was my teenage years that I was incredibly vulnerable to influence, and that music and those stories and those people were at the forefront of all of that culture.
I love the interaction when he walks into the bar and there's Noel and Liam Gallagher. There's this shooting pool, and I just thought I thought the two guys who played Noel and Liam were really good.
Yeah,
and they actually should do the biopic of Oasis because that's got to come eventually too. Because who doesn't want to watch the behind the fly on the wall story of Noel and Liam, even if some of it's a little bit, taking liberties? I want to see that movie.
Yeah, I mean, their relationship was very famously, contentious. Because I think an important part of it that might not be, immediately obvious to people outside of the UK is that they're all from the same part of England as well. They're all from the northwest, round Manchester, and that was where all the best music was coming from at that time. I mean, it had a period in the late 80s with bands like Joy Division and New Order and the Hacienda Club and Happy Mondays, Stone Roses, all of these kind of big bands like at the late 80s, early 90s. And then into the mid 90s, the two biggest bands in the country would Take That and Oasis. And they were both from the northwest as well, Manchester and the surrounding area, between Manchester and Liverpool on the west coast. So, that just sort of stoked the fires, that their music was very different, their public image was very, very different. But England's not that big, and the celebrity circles in England aren't that big either, particularly if you're both in the same industry. So they would have been seeing too much of each other already, and because they've got this sort of clean-cut pretty boy image against Oasis's very aggressively working class bad boy image, that just fueled the fire. And then when they would start getting involved with the same women and people like that, with Nicole, is it Nicole Apton or Natalie Apton?
Yeah, from
Nicole
All Saints.
From All Saints, which were kind of like the other girl group when the Spice Girls came out, which was all it was all in response to the success of Take That and Boyzone. So it was a whole thing. And it was constantly in the papers. The feuding and or just Mostly it was just the Gallagher brothers just talking shit about everybody.
Yeah, yeah. When they weren't
And so
talking
yeah,
shit about each other.
so it was great, and you couldn't get away from it, and it was a complete circus for a
Yeah.
few years there.
How do you feel? I mean, we know your opinion on Bohemian Rhapsody, and you showed
Mm.
some concern that with Robbie Williams' involvement in Better Man, that maybe too many corners will be rounded. But it sounds like you feel this product is of much better than Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, I think he. Oh yes, without a doubt, without a doubt.
Mhm.
It for a start, it doesn't have. I think because of the monkey thing, it doesn't have that same
It's
kind
what
of.
Gabriel said. It has a monkey singing, man.
So it has that. It also doesn't have the kind of wiggy period element to it so overtly as the Queen movie does, Bohemian Rhapsody to it. You know, where so much of that movie is taken up with, you know, wigs and teeth and costumes and all
Yeah.
that kind of side of it, which isn't really or isn't so obvious or so offensive this time out. So I don't think it's got anything to do with the music, because I would probably say I prefer Queen's music to certainly to Take That's music and Robbie Williams' music. I just feel that I think the decision to sort of take one step out of reality with the
Hmm.
film really helped it, you know, to elevate the kind of carnival-esque nature of it, which I think
Yeah.
is where Gracie really sort of where he shows his strengths
Hmm.
after doing The Greatest Showman, to emphasize what a complete giddy whirlwind the whole scene was.
Yeah.
Uh, just helps it, because it's almost an open acknowledgement that, like, yeah, this isn't a documentary. You know,
Mhm.
this isn't attempting to essentially bring the past to life. This is just a memory of it, if you
Yeah.
like, which
Yeah.
is why the Rocket Man movie worked better than Bohemian Rhapsody as well. Because the Bohemian Rhapsody felt like, okay, no, we're trying to recreate stuff as it happened, and so every time we get it wrong, every time it does something differently, it tweaks something, changes something, completely reinterprets something, leaves something out that it does
Yeah.
many times. It's far more obvious
Yeah.
and worse as a result.
Well, I think like Rocketman too, there was always these surreal scenes too, where you're taken out of reality, which Bohemian Rhapsody didn't really have that. Rocketman would have these moments where some kind of surreal encounter would be going on that's either going on in his head, or they're trying to convey to the audience some kind of image. And that's what Better Man does. I mean, I love when he's playing, what's the festival? Not
Nebworth,
Nebfest?
Nebworth,
Nebworth.
I
Thank
think.
you,
Yeah.
Nebworth. He's playing Nebworth, and suddenly, I mean, he's doing an amazing performance, and you can I've gone to YouTube and watched. He opens up with "Let Me Entertain You," and it's hard not to get goosebumps the way that guy, can just mesmerize a crowd, almost like Freddie Mercury.
Mm.
I always said, how does like God just reaches down and touches a person and gives them this power that when they walk on a stage, people are just electrified. And Williams has that quality about him. But what I love in this film is suddenly he's got all these internal demons going on. And despite the fact he's doing this incredible performance, suddenly he's fighting all these apes from previous all of his inner demons are coming
Mm.
at him, and he's having this whole Dungeons and Dragons killing spree while he's doing this performance. I loved that. I thought it was very creative, and it was a way of conveying, just those internal struggles that the Williams obviously has been dealing with his whole life.
Yeah, and chief among those obviously is the relationship between him and his dad, which
Yeah.
is a big part of the actual narrative. You know, that his dad was sort of this working class kind of entertainer, nightclub entertainer who
Hmm.
idolized all the legendary crooners like from the Rat Pack and all of those guys, and sort of drills into him this idea from a very young age that if you're not famous, you're not anybody. You know, the only way to succeed in life is to be is to be famous, essentially.
Yeah.
And that, and obviously Robbie Williams achieved that and has achieved that in abundance, but at an incredible cost and a great price to his mental health and physical well-being. It
Yeah.
seems,
Yeah.
and the film does suggest that it was his father's sort of misguided and rather frustrated desire to make it, and
Yeah.
resentment, when Robbie does get a break, that is part of the problem, really.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of, at first I sensed like he was having real resentment at his son's success, but then there's kind of almost a trying to live vicariously through his
Mm.
son. And I love how they kind of reconcile. Again, I've gone to YouTube and there really is a clip of
Yes,
them singing together and the Frank Sinatra song. I think it's was it My Way they
I think it's
sing?
my way. Yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
My Way. And
yeah.
which was a real touching conclusion to the film. I'm glad that, I mean, the dad was definitely a flawed individual, but and he'd left the family at a young age. I mean, this guy has his own problems. But I'd love how it shows that people are complex, they're nuanced, and you never think for a moment, yeah, he was narcissistic and he's very selfish, but he also legitimately loved Robbie too. And so it conveyed all that complexity without it just being kind of, oh, my dad was a bad guy who left me as a kid. Now I've got to struggle with this. No, his dad was kind of an element through his whole life for good or for ill.
Mm. I mean, I don't know if I agree with all of that. I think he didn't love him enough to stick around,
Well, that's
and
what I'm saying is, and he was
be
a
a
narcissist and selfish, but
yeah.
I think those elements are, that's what I mean, is complex. I mean, yes, he's this. But I never got for a minute like he didn't love his son. In fact, I think they even have an encounter where Robbie Williams is like suggesting that he, doesn't care about him, and he's like, I forget the exact words, but it's like, you think I don't care because I've done, this, and at least in the dad's mind,
Mm.
it might not always come across to Robbie, but I think in the dad's mind, he's doing what he thinks is best for Robbie. I mean, we as the viewer and the audience knows it's pretty messed up because the dad's got delusions of grandeur.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that
Dynamic.
dynamic. That's what I was looking at. I love that dynamic of Robbie and the dad, and I'm glad he was kind of a constant through the film.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. He wasn't around to be a role model.
I know.
And I think that has clearly damaged Robbie. Certainly at a young age, I think he probably could have done with somebody like that. And even his dad's limited experience within, a small
Hmm.
incarnation of the industry might have been useful. But
Yeah.
he was an influence enough to put this seed, this kind of, I look at it as a kind of sort of poisonous idea into his
Yeah.
head,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
walk away and
Hmm.
let it fester. So it's difficult to how to really interpret it. I mean, on the one hand, he's his dad, and he should always be there, and he
Yeah.
should always Robbie maybe should always make time for him at the same time, and that there are efforts to reconcile, but it always seems to be on the father's terms. Where only when it's convenient
Yeah.
to him, only when he needs something, and so I'm not as forgiving as you are. I think about him. I think he was as a force of ill far
Hmm.
more than he was a force for good in Robbie's life.
No, I wouldn't argue that. I mean, it's part of the reason that we see Robbie having the huge narcissistic selfishness because that's what's been modeled to him. I
Mm.
mean, the relationship he has with I forget the girl's name from All Saints, but
Nicole.
yeah, I mean, he's a jerk. Of course, yeah, he's young, but this is what he knows. This is what's been modeled to him. This is how he saw his father treating his mother.
Yeah, well, and that is true in every walk of life. As they say, hurt people, and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if you don't have a good father figure, imagine it's less likely that you might be a good father, or maybe it's just as viable that you might be a better father in opposition to the fact as a means of compensation. Anyway, I think we're straying
I've
slightly.
seen it. Yeah, I've seen it work both ways. Absolutely. What would you say? What should we use as a unit of measure to judge this film?
It's got to be CGI chimpanzees, hasn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, I'm going to go first, James. Like I said, I had, I can't. I won't even say low expectations. I had no expectations about this film. I just found it very enjoyable. Maybe it was partly because I was watching it with my son and we were enjoying it together. And obviously, he's a big music aficionado, and he spent 5 years in Manchester. So, he was kind of giving me a little input during the film. And like I said, I've always enjoyed Robbie Williams. I love what the creative decision to use the chimpanzee. And so, for as biopics go, I'm giving this 4 CGI monkeys. I think this is an enjoyable couple hours. You don't even have to be a Robbie Williams fan to enjoy this film. Just a lover of music, a lover of Brit culture in the 90s and the early 2000s. It's a fun film and well done. And yeah, 4.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I just went back and looked at my Letterboxd ranking because I couldn't quite remember what I'd given it at the time. Because I saw it like 2 months ago now. I saw it at the beginning of
Okay.
December, and I gave it 3 back
Hmm.
then. But I think it's very telling the fact that 2 months later, I haven't seen it again, but it has matured fondly in my memory. I held up against all of those other biopics. We've talked at length about how much I don't like Bohemian Rhapsody, how I was mixed on Rocket Man. We've got there's another big music biopic around at the moment, A Complete Unknown. This movie has, it is maturing. Yeah, it is maturing well in my head, and I want to up my rating.
Okay.
I don't give halves because I think it probably is around 3.5, something like that. But because I think the monkey thing does work, it
Yeah.
shouldn't, but it does. I think it's such a nostalgia trip. It took me back to a time in my life which I have,
Yeah.
what wasn't, which I now look back on incredibly fondly. I now look back and really enjoy, my teenage years and my university years, particularly because I went to University of Manchester as well
Yeah.
in the late 90s during the Manchester years, which were iconic in British history of recent times. Yeah, 97, that big election when Tony Blair won in a landslide. I was up there in the
Yeah.
northwest of England, and it was a hell of a time. And Robbie Williams is so much part of that era.
Hmm.
And it's just really well made. It's really entertaining, and in a way that I didn't really expect. So I am gonna change my initial
Hmm.
rating from 2 months ago, and I'm
So
gonna
Robbie
join you.
Williams. Okay.
I'm gonna
So
join
Robbie
you.
Williams did entertain you.
Hey, there you go.
My
Yes,
earliest song that I
and
can
I am
remember
and I am a
because
better man because of it. There you go.
oh, I was part of the whole, I've mentioned before the being in Hong Kong and it's still being very British, particularly back then. The Oasis and Spice Girls were huge. I don't
Mm.
remember Robbie Williams being as big here, but I do remember the first song that I heard that I heard it was Robbie Williams and liking this song a lot, and it was Millennium. That's my first
Oh,
song.
okay.
Whereas I thought, oh, that's a good song. I got to know more about this guy.
That's one that has the kind of John Barry-esque Bond style
Yeah,
riff in it.
yeah,
Da, 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 da,
yeah, yeah,
da. Yeah, it has
yeah,
that bit in it. From You Only Live Twice, by the way.
yeah,
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, because the other thing, of course, is that the handover was 97. So that was
yeah,
right around exactly that time as well. It was the
yeah,
Hong Kong
yeah.
handover. I wasn't here yet, but it was a very potent time. I'm surprised his
I was
songs weren't.
here. I was here. Yeah.
You were. I'm
I watched
surprised
that Union
songs
Jack 'em
like,
down.
I thought you were going to say that the song you heard first was Angels, because that's earlier.
I
And
might
that's,
have heard
and
it
that's
earlier,
huge.
but I didn't connect the dots of who it was. The one I connected was Millennium.
Okay. Okay. Which
What was
obviously came a
huge
little bit
here,
later.
what was gigantic here in Hong Kong was Spice Girls. Spice Girls was huge.
Oh, they took the world by storm.
Yeah.
Definitely. I was just going to say, let us know what you thought of Better Man, because I know that this film quite famously bombed in the US. It was like the first bomb of the year. It came out like right after New Year, and no one in the US went to see it. And there's probably a number of reasons for that. But if you did, or if you didn't, if you chose not to, let us know. Give us some feedback. As Steve was saying, we're on social media. You can find me on Blue Sky at Marshy00. I'm also on Letterboxd at Marshy00. So yeah, come and follow us on there and share your comments there. That's always seems to be a good growing community. And yeah, what's a good music biopic for someone who doesn't like it?
I was just going to add with it not doing well in the States. It's probably linked to the fact that Robbie Williams has never really taken off in the States. I mean, people kind of know him, but the average American doesn't know Robbie Williams. I call Robbie Williams the Cliff Richard of his generation. It's like massive in the UK, massive in Australia and other English speaking and other parts of the world. But somehow that just sheer fame has eluded him in the US. I don't know why. Kylie Minogue is not. Kylie Minogue is similar.
And it's an outrage, I tell you, an outrage. But then Kylie Minogue, Natalie Imbruglia, Jason Donovan, Carl McLachlan, Aussies who came up through the soap operas and then turned to music careers and all did much better in the UK than
Till next episode.
Wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be. Your voice